Beach FM, locals talking to locals.
Beach FM, great to welcome into the radio Cara Douglas, who's just published a book called The Air That We Breathe. Cara, good morning and welcome.
Hello.
Tell us the story of this story. Where did it come from?
The story of the story. It came from a desire I had to tell the story about Wittenoom and the history of this town in Western Australia, because my birth father passed away from living in the town.
Really?
Yes.
What was the problem? It was some kind of environmental problem, was it?
Yes, so the town, Wittenoom itself, is completely contaminated from asbestos fibres, which are still floating around in the air.
Goodness.
It is a result from when the mine closed in the 60s, when they were mining asbestos, and they never cleaned it up properly. So environmentally, it's a bit of a disaster as well.
Goodness me. So this is something that affects an entire town.
Yes, definitely. So the government in Western Australia basically set up, once the asbestos was discovered, the government and corporates basically built a town to house the miners and their families while they worked there. And then when the mine closed in the 60s, and since then the government have worked to, I guess, erase the town, so demolishing the buildings,
Goodness.
covering up the runway. Yeah.
So the government had a hand in building the town?
Yes, because after the Great Depression, a lot of people were looking for work.
Yes.
So this was in the 30s and in the 40s mainly, is when the mine managers basically went over to Europe to recruit physically fit young labourers to come and work for them in the mine, and they didn't know what they were coming to, and they didn't know how isolated the town, well, the outback is very desolate. It's very barren.
So this was the only place, effectively, this was the only place that they could live. They had no choice.
Pretty much, yeah. And then the unfortunate thing was that they were pretty much bonded by the company for 3 years, because the company paid for them for their passage out to Australia.
So the mining asbestos, was this at a time when asbestos was not known to be harmful to humans?
It actually was known to be harmful to humans at the time, and while the mine was in operation, the mine managers were told of the warnings about what they were doing and the dangers of the asbestos, but they basically ignored that because they were also making a profit. And
the reason I asked the question about the government is that you would expect a government to be held accountable for some of those decisions. Were they held accountable? Not really, no. And then, there was a person that in the 70s set up a asbestos disease society in Australia, and he was really instrumental, the man that set this up, to be the voice for those people who were then getting ill from living in the town and from the ex-miners, the workers. He was the Erin Brockovich type character, was he? Quite, yeah, pretty much. He even went to change legislation for victims and has done significant work. So that is the background, and that is where your story came from. How fictionalized is your story?
So my story is a total fictional novel, and it's about the Moretti family, who are Italian immigrants, and they journey into Western Australia because they're promised a secure future. And there's a lot of fact that I've woven through the story, through the narrative and the dialogue. So it's very much fiction. It's a family's journey.
Right. I love those historical novels. But is there any similarity at all between that family and your birth father's family?
So there is, in terms of the fact that asbestos-related disease has taken a life, and also the without going into the story, I guess that's the unthinkable, is when people get sick from doing innocent things decades earlier.
the book is in memory of my birth father. So,
yeah. And I imagine it came from stories that he told you. That's where the genesis of the book came from.
That, and also the research. I have done 10 years of research on the story, and the more I unravelled about Wittenoom and the history of the town, the more intrigued I was. And so I kept researching, and I have folders and folders of information. I have court cases, I have medical documents, I interviewed people, I went to Australia, listened to interviews from Italians that the whole families went to Wittenoom and the damage from that. So it's very fictionalised.
However, based on real and a tragic kind of situation, have you formed any views about corporate greed and blindness to those emerging scientific facts? They just didn't want to know about it because it would interfere with the cash flow.
Oh, absolutely. And even when the mine closed in 1966, the reason they gave to close the mine was basically to do with the lack of profit, but it wasn't really to do with that. It was to do with the warnings they were continuing to receive from the medical experts.
Was there any legal recourse to that? You mentioned the gentleman who was leading the charge. Surely you could have a go at these firms in Australia. You can sue, class actions, etc., against companies. Was that attempted?
Yes, so there were class action court cases that went through. So quite a few people were starting to seek compensation and justice for the wrongs from the corporate, and unfortunately legislation wasn't favouring them. So what happened was the legislation was changed so that if the victim passed away before the case was heard and concluded, then compensation would go to the victim's widow or family.
Right.
So that was a big move, because what was happening was the corporates knew that basically people were dying on the steps of the courthouse.
So it was in their interest to spin things out, I guess.
And that's what they did.
Yeah.
The more I read about this whole history, the more I was determined and adamant that I needed to get the story out, because so many people have never heard of the town and they've never heard of the story.
Indeed, I've never heard of the story, I've never heard of the town, and I'm so delighted to have come across this book, The Air That We Breathe. You mentioned you put 10 years into research. That's just enormous. You don't think you got a little bit obsessed about this, do you, Cara?
Sometimes I did, because the more I read, the more angry I got with the truth of what happened, and so it made me more determined to get the story out and make a difference to people that hopefully pick it up and learn about a piece of history, and also learn about the dangers of asbestos.
Absolutely. 10 years in research. How long did it take to write it?
So on and off, it would have taken probably 5 years. I took a year out of full-time employment to actually just write this book full-time. And it's had so many versions. The original manuscript is completely different to the finished product.
That's an enormous. I'm just thinking, you spent 5 years in writing the book, 10 years in research. This is a major part of your life that you have devoted to this. And what would you like to see as a result of writing the book?
I'd like to see, and I'm actually really excited and grateful, because I'm already seeing what the whole purpose of the book is, and that people are interested, they're learning about Wittenoom, they're learning about what's happened, and hopefully I can make a difference.
How's the book selling in Western Australia? Do we know yet?
So I've started selling it in New Zealand, and
I see.
My next plan, but it has been across Western Australia papers already, so that's caused a bit of interest.
Well, I'm sure, because I'm sure it's a very, very live discussion. As we know, Western Australia seems to be determined to export itself, just dig up every bit of dirt there is and export it somewhere around the world. So this is very much on the agenda, I would think, and we wish you very well in Western Australia and also in New Zealand, because really this is a universal story. It didn't just happen in Western Australia, this sort of thing, but this seems to be a particularly bad example. The Air That We Breathe, Cara Douglas is the author, and it's been great to have you on the radio this morning. Thank you so much for your time, Cara.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
106.3 Beach FM.